Uh, Thank you, Rabbi Alex. It's a real pleasure, I have to say, to blow the shofar, but I do remind you that the blessing and the mitzvah is lishmor kol shofar, which is to hear. So I'm just delighted that everybody can hear and appreciate. On Shabbat Shuvah, I'd like to discuss how we get the book, how we get to here. In the 7th century BCE, a young 8-year-old boy became king of Judah. His name was Josiah, and according to 2 Kings 22, he did what was pleasing to God, and he followed all of the ways of his forefather David, and he did not deviate to the right or to the left. When he was 18, he became a great leader of his people and made a huge impact on the Judaism of today. This parasha Va-yelech gives some interesting hints on how he managed this. But first, some background. The northern kingdom was swept away by the Assyrians in the 8th century BCE. The King Josiah was then threatened by the upstart city of Babylon in the north and Egypt in the south. The old religion based on the temple was declining, and people had been attracted to enjoying the pagan rituals in temples and on high places. The young Josiah needed to change things and needed the authority to bring about this change. To do this, he had to demonstrate a credible link with the authority of the past. He was able to harness the new revolution, the development of reading and writing for the masses. The biblical scholar William Schneidwind summarized it well. With the emergence of literacy and the flourishing of literature, a textual revolution arose in the days of King Josiah. This was one of the most profound cultural revolutions in human history, the assertion of the orthodoxy of texts. As writing spread throughout Judean society, literacy broke out of the confines of the closed scribal schools, the royal court, and the lofty temples. Beginning in the burgeoning government bureaucracy, the use of writing spread throughout society. Basic literacy became commonplace. The spread of literacy enabled a central feature of the religious revolution of Josiah, the religious authority of the written text. This was the great and enduring legacy of the Josianic reforms and the development of Western civilization. How did Josiah find his Torah? Well, he asked Shaphan, the scribe, to take some silver to Hilkiah, the high priest, and suggested that they do some redecorating of the temple in Jerusalem. Amazingly, the workmen found a Sefer Torah that had been hidden out of sight, that conveniently had all of the key reforms that Josiah wanted to make. It also invoked the message that these reforms are given by the great rule maker, Moses. What is the book? It's the book of Devarim, or Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy has a beginning, probably written a bit later, a middle, and that's the retelling of the story of Exodus, Another middle, which are a load of rules, which in fact are a lot of what we use as Jews today. And finally, an ending, which included the Hatzinu poem that we're going to read next week. So much of modern Judaism is linked to this book of Deuteronomy. Two highlights among many: Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof. Justice, justice, you will pursue. There's also a reference to King Josiah. When he, the king, is seated by his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priests. Interesting, Levitical priests, not the Aaronite priests of Leviticus. So it's beginning to show a move in the politics of the temple. Thus he will not act haughtily towards his fellows, or deviate, that phrase again, from the instruction to the right or to the left. There are interesting differences with the previous books of the Torah. Only the pilgrim festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, are mentioned. There's nothing about Yom Teruah, the biblical name for Rosh Hashanah, or Yom Kippur. In fact, there's no mention of shofarot, tekias, teruahs, or any other kind of blowing. Not a peep. Bit of a blow for a shofar blow, but thankfully it is mentioned elsewhere. This supports the claim that it was written before the exile into Babylon and was not changed to reflect the new festivals of Rosh Hashanah that were included in the list of the festivals in the books of Leviticus and Numbers. So how is the authority of Moses established? Rabbi Alex read today, quite simply, Moses wrote down this teaching and gave it to the priests, the sons of Levi. Again, the Levites. Moses' role is reinforced by subtle changes in the message. The 10 Commandments are included, but with a key modification. We don't zechor, remember, but shamor, observe the Shabbat. And we look back not to creation, but that moment for Moses, the exodus of Egypt, that the authority is based on. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and your God Adonai freed you from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore your God Adonai has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Robert Alter states in his introduction, the book of Deuteronomy is the most sustained deployment of rhetoric in the Bible. It is presented, after all, as Moses' valedictory address, which he delivers across the Jordan from the Promised Land just before his death, as the people assemble before him and are poised to cross the river into the land. It comprises a series of speeches, discourses, or as some scholars actually call them, sermons. He goes on to say, one function of the surrounding rhetoric is to underwrite the authority of the laws he had promulgated, reminding the people again and again that their very lives and their collective survival on the land depend on the punctilious observance of this teaching, HaTorah Hazot. A good example of this rhetoric is V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol miyadecha. You shall love your God Adonai with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. So Josiah now has his Sefer Torah, clearly written by Moses. What next? Josiah needs someone to verify the authority of his find. So he goes to ask the prophetess Huldah. That we discuss in the LJS Prophets book that you can get outside. And she says, but say this to the king of Judah, thus says the Eternal, the God of Israel, as for the words that you have heard, because your heart was softened, and you humbled yourself before God when you heard what I decreed. And because you rent your clothes and wept before me, I, for my part, have listened, declares God. Her words seem pretty Delphic to me, but Josiah took them that his Torah had been approved. Josiah now had to tell the people. He took them up to the temple and he told them in their ears. And then later he reiterated it, as Rabbi Va-yelech said today. And Moses instructed them as follows: every 7th year, when all Israel comes to appear before your God Adonai, in the place that God will choose, you shall read this teaching aloud in the presence of all Israel. Gather the people, men, women, children, and the strangers in your communities, that they may hear and so learn to revere your God Adonai and to observe faithfully every word of this teaching. This enabled Josiah to get his message out to the people. And today, this practice of reading from the Torah is now an integral part of our liturgy. So Josiah, with the support of the people, was able to bring about reforms he wanted. He centralized the Jewish religion again in Jerusalem, and he added sensible laws about life, agriculture, and business, and proposed that they were regulated by courts, not priests. They remain an important part of our halakha today. Josiah ruled successfully for another 21 years and sadly died at the hands of the Egyptians during the Battle of Megiddo, or sometime soon after. He tried to walk a fine line between the Egyptians and the Babylonians, but the latter ended up invading Judah successfully 10 years later and had destroyed the temple only 20 years later after his death. Are there any lessons in this story for us today on Shabbat Shuvah? Yes. Josiah harnessed the new wave of literacy, which is akin to the development of the printing press, the internet, or AI. However, he was very careful to demonstrate his legitimacy and authority. And as Jews, we believe that Adonai, our God, had considerable influence in the writing of the text, if not directly holding the pen. Today, we're facing a tsunami of misinformation that is drowning out analysis, reason, science, and morality. Experts are despised. Scientific rigor, moral decency, and humanity are mocked. We must not give up hope. And on Shabbat Shuvah, let us return to the Torah to reinforce and ground our values and find ourselves. We must base our decisions on the truth, diligently question our facts and our sources, and be thankful that we are a religion that demands that we constantly question and we encourage our children to question. Finally, in the Shema, there are 2 letters that are enlarged, an ayin in the word Shema and a dalet in the word echad. They spell the word aid, which means witness. And so now, as we look forward to the year ahead, I think it's imperative that we bear witness both to our faith and to the truth. Shabbat Shalom, Shana Tova, Gemar Chatima Tova. May you be sealed in the book of life and a year of health, well-being, and peace. Thank you.